Here are my note cards. Act like a man. How many times in your life have you heard some sort of phrase along those lines? My parents are almost in their 60s now, are both from traditional conservative households, but were very sympathetic to my siblings and I growing up, and frankly nurtured very emotional relationships between all of us. But even then, I still feel like I heard the phrase, be a man, almost every day of my life. But to my parents and to the rest of the world, it's only natural that we would encourage those around us to feel unbothered or nonchalant when something in our lives goes wrong, the way that typically a man would. But why isn't a man considered manly when he is bothered by something? The first and only argument that I have ever had with my boyfriend stemmed after he was not accepted into a very prestigious acting program at his college. And in my 15 years of knowing him, I had never seen him exert so much anger than in that moment, which was very concerning for me. But when all was said and done, and we were saying our apologies, he left one line with me that has stuck with me until this day. I feel like I failed, but I don't feel like I was supposed to as a man. And that idea of emotional suppression kind of led me to think how much of that could have been avoided if he just felt like he could have expressed his emotions to begin with. This emotional suppression also leads me to my topic today, which is toxic masculinity. We can define this as sort of the set of ideologies that a man has to act a certain way in order to be considered masculine. And when looking at toxic masculinity, we can quite literally look at it as a life cycle that begins in infancy. So immediately when children are born, the emotional landscapes that their parents paint for male children versus female children are drastically different. Kids are taught at a young age what is feminine versus what is masculine. And while this seems innocent in nature, these parents are also defining certain emotions as feminine or certain emotions as masculine. And male toddlers are known for being drastically less emotionally expressive than female toddlers are. And the biggest contributor to this is the specific emotions that parents foster in these children at an early age. And in a study done by Robin Finnish, who is a psychology professor at Emory University, she found that when addressing a set of toddlers' bad behavior, fathers who addressed female children typically focused on a very wide array of emotions versus when they would address their male toddlers only focused on one emotion, which is anger. And continuing the cycle, as this child becomes a young adult, these ideas around masculinity are reinforced by their peers. It was very common for me growing up to hear terms on the playground like "that's so gay," or "kick like a girl," or "man up." And while these seemed innocent in nature, these boys were subconsciously diminishing these ideas of femininity or flamboyancy among their peers. And the teenage years are also years where teens typically develop addictive behaviors. And from a young age, these boys are taught to keep their friend circle as small as possible, but to broaden their sexual circle as well as their romantic circle. And this idea that they have to maintain these constant artificial relationships is a direct gateway into them developing other addictive behaviors like porn, drugs, or alcohol, which we know is a gateway into them developing the risk of potentially becoming a domestic abuser, as well as broadening their risk of suicide later in life. And now the cycle continues and frankly ends when this victim of toxic masculinity becomes a father. So when neglect is familiar, neglect is typically repeated. And child victims will often reciprocate these feelings of neglect in their own children because, according to a study by Elizabeth Hartney, who is another psychology professor at Royal Road University, she states that men remember that their fathers felt powerful while belittling them, and later in life will frequently repeat this cycle so that they can gain back that same feeling of power. And this idea of power leads these men to create artificial relationships with their own son, which are frankly only based on competitiveness, which are placed in their sons at as young as infancy. And now that we have reviewed the cycle, I want to kind of review some of the main topics from today. This idea of toxic masculinity and emotional suppression is damaging on a wide scale to a male's physical, mental, and emotional health. And the ideology that men have to act a certain way lead them to lifetimes of insecurities, substance abuse, mental illness, as well as ultimately domestic violence. But while these ideas of toxic masculinity are caused by outside sources, they can also be prevented by outside sources. And we can help these men that have been emotionally suppressed by initiating conversations on mental health, nurturing boys the same way that we do as girls, and providing open marital communication as well as just communication in relationships. And now reviewing, I would like to go back to our introduction, and I would like to redefine something today. I believe that a real man addresses all of his son's emotions. I believe that a real man refuses to degrade femininity or flamboyancy. And I believe that a real man is willing to better his relationship with his son and ultimately break the cycle.